started. Oh, geez. I just got hot mic. Hey, everybody, my name's Joe Campbell. I'm a Principal Security Advisor at Dell Software. And today the topic we're going to be discussing is, I like to call it when SSO isn't enough, or something along those lines. We're going to be covering a couple of security technology type of aspects that some of you may be very familiar with. As a matter of fact, I just got off I'm making this point for a reason. I just got off the phone with a CISO from a healthcare company in California, literally just a couple minutes ago. And we were talking about industry trends and whatnot, and I brought up the notion of multi-factor security. And she said, don't talk about that, everybody's got that. And I was like, I know for a fact that everybody doesn't have that. And if they have it, they've barely implemented it, right? And I want to talk about roadblocks and things like that. So anyway, I think sometimes you may hear me say things in this particular presentation where you kind of say, dude, that's obvious. But there may be a lot of people around us that are like, well, that's not entirely obvious to me. And so really the gist of the conversation here, let me advance the slide, is this statement right here. Many organizations rush into an SSO solution without much guidance. And by that, what I mean is there's a lot of pressure from our customers saying, you know, we're tired of all the passwords, everybody else is doing it. And it's almost like this quick win strategy of saying, let's go ahead and implement something, and we're going to make our users and our customers happy. But they're missing a lot of opportunity. And they don't realize that SSO, to me, as a security advisor, is a lot less about making our users happy that they don't have to remember passwords. As a security advisor, it's more about audit trails and controlling access to everything and making sure that is done in the appropriate way. And if you just rush into, gosh, how many people do we deal with that have ADFS, for example? You know, you get what you pay for. And they don't even have the concept of the things that I'm going to talk about. And when I start explaining to them that this is way more than making sure people can single sign on into Salesforce, and I start talking to them about this is a security issue, not a user satisfaction issue. Well, it's both, but to me, it's way more of a security issue. People start to kind of say, okay, I kind of see what you're saying. So the first thing I want to talk about when it comes to, hey, you're missing something, is the notion of legacy style applications. By legacy style, that's what I call applications that are credential based. Okay, so I think I go into a little bit more detail in a second. Yeah, I'll go into a little bit more detail. So again, this is one of the first things I talk to people when I come in and look at their existing SSO projects, or when I'm talking to them trying to tell them about what the important things they need to remember about SSO is I kind of introduce the topic of legacy style applications or credential style applications. So what are those? What do I mean? Well, we're talking about things like form fill, apps that use basic authentication, Windows authentication, God forbid, header injection. They're still out there. And a lot of people say, well, you know, what if I don't account for these apps? Who cares, right? Well, there's going to be user frustration, first of all, because we're going to have a lot of apps where single sign-on works, but nobody has only federated apps. No company has only federated apps, right? People still have a mixed bag of tricks. And so there's going to be user frustration when I get to these applications that have credential-based, you know, form fill or whatever, because whatever single sign-on solution we rushed into doesn't account for that. On a security side, so that's more of making our users happy. On a security side, again, we're talking about the loss of audit trail visibility, right? Again, if I want to know what my users are doing and what they're connecting to, and I want to make sure that that's audited, it's easy with SSO to do that for our federated applications. But again, I have no idea what people are doing in the parts system because that's using Windows auth. I couldn't begin to tell you what's happening there. There's no audit trail in the database. Third-party applications, et cetera, no visibility whatsoever. So what George is going to talk about, governance becomes extremely difficult because there's no single point of control. There's no single point of audit. The danger of stale accounts. Again, you have some systems where maybe they have their own user database, right? A third-party system that doesn't use Active Directory or something like that. Maybe their credentials are stored there. Again, there's no real way to know unless you're going through a central IDP whether or not people are actually using it. You know, when's the last time someone logged in with this credential? That system doesn't tell you, right? When we see what I'm going to show you in a demo in a second, my system will tell you, even though most single sign-on solutions aren't going to be able to tell you that kind of thing. The other thing that I hear a lot that I discuss with people when I'm talking about legacy-based authentication. There are some single sign-on vendors that are, and I'm going to bring up something very important in just a second that I forgot. It was a preface that I wanted to say. But there are some people say that, hey, don't worry about your legacy style apps, just rewrite them. Well, that's impossible for the off-the-shelf application and the one where the developer threw himself in front of a bus. Okay, so again, I need to make sure that you guys can get a holistic approach to what we're doing here. And so the point here is make sure that your single sign-on solution not only covers federated applications, but covers everything. Now, the preface that I missed when I opened up here, any ping customers here? I imagine there's, okay, a couple ping customers. What I'm going to show you is perfectly compatible with ping. Okay, so that's the first thing. If you're going to see some technologies and some things I'm going to do, and I want to make sure that you guys understand that this isn't something where you take your investment in ping and throw it away. You could, but that's not our strategy in all cases. And sometimes we come in, we'll actually augment an ADFS implementation, for example. A lot of customers say, I've got too much stuff in here, too much time. Can you come in and give me all the stuff that you just showed me, but I want ADFS to remain my identity provider? Ping, et cetera, no problem. So let's take a look at what I'm talking about. All right, we're going to jump into a quick demo here. Again, trying to be a little demo heavy. So I'm going to log in to my application portal and just kind of take a look at what SSO means to me when I'm talking about covering all sorts of application types. The product we're looking at here is called Cloud Access Manager. Your login screen is going to vary. We'll customize it for you. It's going to look like your company. What I'm seeing here is a fairly typical concept with SSO these days, right? This is an application portal. With our product, you can use it if you want. You don't have to use it if you don't want. You can completely customize it if you want. But notice in this portal, I've got cloud applications. Now, not all of these are actually, well, maybe all of these are federated. Yeah, all of these are federated, but they don't have to be, right? Even the cloud applications can be credential-based, and I have a demonstration of that I can show. But what I've done is I've kind of gone up to the top here and I've said, let's take a look at some examples of applications that aren't single sign-on aware, have no idea what single sign-on is, and yet from this particular approach, if I have an app that's using header injection, I get single sign-on into it right away. I'm going to go into a little bit more detail about exactly how this is happening in a second, but this is a completely separate application, has no concept whatsoever of an IDP, but the developer told me if I can at least inject an identity into the header, then I can get single sign-on to it. For the guys that are familiar with federation, one of the things about a SAML token or WS Fed, certain aspects of OAuth, et cetera, notice the things at the bottom here that are highlighted. There's attributes about the user that I'm also injecting. And so for the people that talk about the benefits of federation by saying to the developers, not only am I going to give you the identity of this person from Active Directory or LDAP or whatever, but I'm also going to give you the attributes you need. So you don't have to create a connector to that database or to that directory to go find out what these things are. Everything I'm going to show you in regards to credential-based single sign-on, we can still do that, right? And again, like I said, I'm going to tell you how I'm doing this in just a second, because there's some interesting caveats to, not caveats, but some interesting features. Here's a standard everyday form fill application. You see my credentials get entered into it right away, and I log into it. This time with a completely different user ID. So here it says $J Campbell. That's like my IT account. I'm still injecting attributes at the bottom. We can see that, right? And again, this application is just a simple demo app, right? It doesn't really do anything besides what we're seeing here. Now, this is where a lot of people sometimes say to me, okay, I've seen form fill before. That's not very exciting. A browser will do that. LastPass will do that, et cetera. With our solution, this works no matter where you are. You go to the public library, it puts the credentials in for you. You do it on your mobile phone, it enters the credentials for you. Right? So the one thing I want to point out about our SSO approach to legacy-style applications like this is it does not require browser plugins whatsoever. It doesn't require any sort of software installed onto the target server. And these are all important things. There's a shift in the industry, right? There's a lot of customers I've seen that have agent-based single sign-on, and they always complain about things like the agents are a pain to maintain. If you have to upgrade, there's major outages, and then it never works. With the approach that we have, which is essentially like an interceptor approach, there really isn't any reason why you can't implement this particular method against a finance system in the middle of a financial freeze. Right? And so think about that. Think about the companies that we work in and the people saying, hey, it's a FICE freeze, don't touch anything. If someone came to you and said, hey, I need SSO, I need audit to this finance, we just got audited, we're in the middle of a fight freeze, do you need to install an agent or do I need to rewrite my app? No, right? The CAM approach, Cloud Access Manager, is essentially an interceptor-based approach, right? And so I'll get into a little bit more detail with that in a second. Windows authentication, here's another great example. Windows Auth is federation, right? It's using Kerberos. You're taking a token, you're sending it to the target application, and you log into it. The only two scenarios, well, it's really one scenario where that doesn't work, is if you're not in that domain, right? And so what happens is you hit a Windows authentication site. Notice it's kind of hard to see, but take my word for it. Up here it says DSGsoft, right? That's what I'm currently logged into. That's the domain I'm currently logged into. I hit this application though, and right away it knows in this domain, Tempest, the video game, your ID is Joe, okay? And so here, I'm not being presented with a browser pop-up, an annoying browser pop-up that's saying, hey, can you tell me what your ID is in this domain? Cloud Access Manager knows what your ID is in that domain. All right, so in this scenario, credential-based scenario, the only way I can pull this off is if I have some sort of a password wallet. Okay, and that's how we're pulling this off. That's one of the ways we're pulling this off. So if I go back to the portal screen, we'll pop this open real quick and go look at the password wallet. Here, essentially, for a number of different applications, including cloud apps, et cetera, although they're not all populated, it doesn't matter. Here, basically, Cloud Access Manager is saying, okay, I know your identity. We'll use ping as an example. How do I know your identity? Because when you logged into this ecosystem, ping told me who you were, right? It takes that identity and says, okay, there's a number of SSO federated sites that I can log you into, but there are some that require your credentials. You don't have to tell me what the credentials are. The first time you access that application, like a form fill application, Windows Auth, Basic Auth, et cetera, my environment will see you enter those credentials, spy on you, and basically automatically record those credentials into the wallet. You can populate it with an API if you want. You can manage it. You can put credentials in here that the end users don't even know about. There's a lot of scenarios you can go through here. But essentially, that's kind of how, this is the only way you can do a credential-based system. The big thing about, again, I want to point out one huge difference between the way we do this and the way that some other solutions do this. Remember that no matter where you connect to this from, you go to the kiosk at a university, I know what your credentials are. You don't need any cookies, you don't need any browser plugins, it's going to work everywhere you go. It's kind of a neat approach. So I'll go ahead and pause just briefly. Any questions about credential-based single sign-on, what we're seeing here? Because again, I kind of want to roll through this and just kind of show you guys a couple different scenarios. Yeah, question? Yeah.
How does it actually,
yeah.
You monitor and you add the user here. So you're going to have a browser plugin or a system plugin that will be running on your machine which will capture all this?
Yeah, so the question is, okay, so it's one thing for me to know what your credentials are, but how is it, it's impossible to automatically enter that into a form fill unless you're doing something, right? So yeah, it's later in the presentation we go into a little bit more detail about this, but there's no reason we shouldn't talk about it exactly what it is today. It's a reverse proxy. For these applications, it's a reverse proxy. And I wrote a white paper, if you're interested, called, I think it's something, maybe Todd could remind me if he's here, Busting the Myths of Reverse Proxy. There's a lot of people that hear the word reverse proxy and they get terrified of it. Take a look at that white paper, go download it, and I bust those myths right away. One of the big things that people use in lieu of, you know what, I'm gonna hold off on this particular point because it's gonna be in the presentation in a second, but that's essentially what's happening. And so if you think about someone coming to you during a fight freeze, there's only one thing you need to do essentially. Well, let me explain what a reverse proxy is first. And again, a lot of people are saying, hey, we know what it is, keep going. Well, some people aren't as familiar. When you're behind a corporate firewall and someone types in CNN.com, there's a bunch of things that happen, right? You're going to hit an internet proxy, technically a forward-facing proxy for the lack of a better way of describing it. That proxy does a couple of things. It determines who you are, okay? It does. It doesn't just blindly say, go ahead. It's gonna say, well, wait a minute, I worked at Disney for 14 years, right? The normal Disney employee could not actually get access to Facebook and Twitter, et cetera. So they would try to access the social sites and the proxy would shut you down. However, the guys that worked on the marketing teams, they would go through. So if you think about that proxy, there's two things it's doing. It's filtering the traffic to the gambling sites and the violent sites. And for the sites that aren't gambling and violent, it's saying, you have a business justification to get through this proxy, right? So all the traffic essentially is being controlled by that proxy. This is the exact same technology, but it can be installed internally in your environment. It could be installed in a DMZ in your environment. It can be put wherever you want. And what's happening now is instead of, the only thing you have to do, this paradigm shifts when you go from a forward proxy to a reverse proxy. The only thing you have to do is you have to share a new URL with your user group. That you do have to do. It's usually pretty easy if you can point them here, because you can say, just copy the URL from this hyperlink on the portal page. But what essentially happens is you take the hr.mycompany.com, all right, which gets you to the HR app, and you call it hr.sso.mycompany.com. You have to put something in the DNS that basically says, I want Cloud Access Manager to capture this, okay? So the traffic essentially is coming to my proxy. My proxy is going to authenticate you. It's going to make sure that you can get access to what you want to get. And then I will go and get the content for you. And as that content is going through my proxy, I have the intelligence to say, there's an identity request here for a Kerberos ticket, or there's a form that needs to be filled out, et cetera. And then my software will just automatically populate that information. Now with Cloud Access Manager, that quite literally is the only scenario when it comes to single sign-on where I need a reverse proxy. You don't use that for things like federation, OAuth, OpenID Connect. It's not necessary. But anything where you're using credentials and I need to actually supply that credential for you and inject it into the application somehow, that's the method that we use for doing that. And again, myths. If I use that in my environment, the reverse proxy is going to glow red hot, you know, and I'm going to need 18 of them. No, you're not, right? That was your dad's reverse proxy, right? We're dealing with high-speed software here, quite honestly, on machines that can handle this type of throughput. So there's no performance impact of any real kind you're going to get. There is one thing that we do to the content when it comes through. Again, for the folks that aren't as familiar with reverse proxy, we rewrite strings. Because built into that SSO app or the HR app is a hyperlink for like pictures or customers.hr or whatever. I'll rewrite that automatically so that it gets rewritten to pictures.hr.sso.company.com. Like I'm going to automatically change those things so that all the activity going through that reverse proxy for this app are basically rewritten. Question?
I just wanted to, typically if you're going to use reverse proxy, you just change the URL to get the reverse proxy rather than right?
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to change the URL of the actual application because we'll rewrite anything that comes out of that application, like a dynamic hyperlink, whatever, we'll change it. But yeah, for your users, you present them another URL.
But if they were a customer using hr.mail.com, I guess, and you want it built in your
yeah.
you want to just change the DNS.
You could just change a DNS entry.
Otherwise, you're going to have bookmarks and you're going to have problems.
Yeah, you could just change a DNS entry. And that gets me to another subject, and I don't know how much detail I should go into, but anyway, sometimes when we talk about this technology, they say, well, wait a minute, now there's two ways of getting to my application. You know, not issue. Yeah, it's a simple network exercise, right? No real heavy lifting involved here. So anyway, that's the first thing that I want to kind of remind people when we're talking about SSO. Everybody who does it knows that these applications are going to be left out of the story, but it's way more significant than the fact that, well, maybe some users will be frustrated if we just spend, you know, I don't know, $400,000, we'll rewrite all these apps. No. It's way more significant than this, okay? It has to do with security. It has to do with visibility and controlling access to these sites. When it comes to governance, it has to do with knowing, has this person been provisioned to the header injection app and hasn't used it for the last 10 months? Maybe that's a security issue. Your auditors are going to say, if you don't even know that, then you need to do something. That's where we're going to come in and we're going to make that a little easier for you. Let's get back into this real quick. All right, so that was demo of SSO to everything. So the other thing that I see people do, of course, is when you rush into a single sign-on solution, you don't even think about multi-factor. And some platforms don't even support multi-factor. And it's really interesting, like I said, that CISO discussion I had just before here, it was so interesting that she said, it's for another conference we're doing. She said, don't even bring up multi-factor. Everybody does it. And again, I totally disagree with that. I didn't tell her, but not everybody does it. And some of the people that do it have what's the technical term? I think it's half-assed, right? It's on the VPN, but only for network administrators. And so basically there's a number of roadblocks. Why don't people do this, right? Well, this is what I hear a lot about why people don't implement multi-factor authentication. You can't secure everything. There are some people that have a defeatist attitude. The way George puts it is we sometimes compete against people doing nothing, right? There's two things you can do. You can try to do something, or you can do nothing. All those legacy style applications I showed you a second ago, none of them support multi-factor authentication. For that matter, let's just say for the sake of argument that Office 365 doesn't, Salesforce doesn't, et cetera. So people have this defeatist attitude where it's like, if I can't do it everywhere, I'm not even sure I'm going to do it at all. The other thing I hear is that managing user tokens is hard. There's a huge roadblock to issuing tokens to our users. In the old days, and by the way, a lot of the people that are in charge today remember what this was like in the old days. It was not to cast any dispersions, but it was a secure ID card you had to have in your wallet or on your key ring or something like that. There's two issues about managing user tokens. One of them is how hard it is to deploy, and the other one would be that users don't like it. They don't like carrying key fobs and whatever. There's something that solved that though, right? The thing that solved that is the ubiquitousness. Cell phones are ubiquitous, right? That's one thing. For sight-impaired people, we have things like YubiKey, right? Stick that in a laptop, you push a button, it puts the code in for you, right? There's all sorts of roadblocks that have been removed. And when it comes to our multi-factor solutions, and I think if you solve them, even the issue over how hard is it to get a multi-factor token to a user has been completely taken care of. It's a self-service thing, it's very easy to do, click. All those problems that I've seen people complain about multi-factor are basically gone. So we're gonna go kind of quickly through this because I think I'm preaching to the choir here. I think a lot of people realize that multi-factor's changed a lot. But there's another thing that people complain about, and that's what I call being bludgeoned with multi-factor security, okay? So the scenario I give very often is you're at home, you're connecting to the HR app behind the firewall, right? And you connect, you get a multi-factor prompt. So you pull out your phone, you get a text message, you generate a code, whatever, you put that in. And right after you put it in, your kid comes over and says, Dad, I need to check my Minecraft server. Okay, so you shut down the browser, he comes out, oh, you know what, never mind. 2 seconds have gone by, you open up the app again, and most people today are gonna get prompted with another multi-factor prompt, and that's even if they have it in their WAM solution. Most people, again, reserve it for special scenarios. I think it needs to be put in more places. The industry is completely shifting now, right? The industry is totally shifting. The shift is that we actually don't want to make it harder for people to log in anymore using multi-factor. We actually want to make it easier. We should be strategizing in ways to make it totally easy. But you can only do that, right? You can only make it easier for people to log in if you have risk-enabled multi-factor. And so let's take a quick look at what I mean by risk-enabled multi-factor. So I've got an app right here, this basic auth app. Again, this one has absolutely no idea what multi-factor is or whatever, but because Cloud Access Manager is controlling access to it completely, of course, you're gonna see a multi-factor prompt. The problem with this prompt, you can take my word for it, is that if I put in a code, shut my browser down, and then go back and access the same app or the same URL or whatever, my session's gone, it's gonna ask me again, what's your multi-factor token? And so with our platform, risk is built into it. And there's a number of different things about risk that we do that make this a hell of a lot more intelligent than basically beating people over the head with multi-factor. We're gonna do things, of course, like behavioral analytics. What time of day do you normally connect from? What IP address do you connect from? The browsers you connect from? What applications do you typically connect from? We're gonna do things like what's called like geovelocity. You connected from New Orleans, and then 5 minutes later, you connected from Southern California. It's fine for you to connect from Southern California, but not within 5 minutes, right? We're gonna calculate the reasonable amount of time it takes for you to go from one location to another location. We look at things like the groups you belong to in your directory. Things like, it's one thing for you, Joe, you're just a normal everyday cashier, but Bob's logging in and he's a domain administrator. That should be a higher risk. If you're using our Sonicwall firewall technology, we can tap into that, right? We're probably the only security company in the world that has security products that span everything from the network layer, like a firewall device, all the way to data encryption. Every single piece along the way, we've got security. And so those products in our environments all talk to each other. And the firewall capability, our firewall technology can actually do deep packet inspection on SSL encrypted traffic. All right, so if you have an SSL encrypted traffic, and inside that encrypted traffic is a malware signature, spyware signature, adware, et cetera, that firewall is going to talk to my risk engine and say, there's a threat here. And it's not that you have adware. The problem is that because you have adware, your computer may be controlled from a foreign source, okay? And so in our system, if you want to use normal everyday beat users over the head, multi-factor, you go right ahead. But that's not what we're going to want to do, right? So I'm going to show you another scenario here. Here's my buddy Kim, and we're going to log in over here. And George and I were, Todd just reminded me that there's a video of me doing this demo on YouTube, and so I got to watch my back, because those North Koreans don't take this stuff with a sense of humor. Not the way I hope they do. So from this North Korean machine, we're going to pop over to Cloud Access Manager. And right now, I don't have any sort of risk involved here, right? There's no risk engine kicking off. If you don't have risk involved today in your web access management strategy, if you just implemented SSO without thinking of the implications of what we're talking about here, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit you're missing. One of them, of course, is the basic concept of blocking geographies, North Korea, Sudan, other threat nations, right? There's also something even more obvious than that, and that's the public blacklists, right? If there are public blacklists that are telling you, this is a known server that's used for phishing or denial of service attacks, et cetera, why aren't you incorporating that into your security strategy with your web access management, right? Because that's a huge target. The web is where these attacks come from 9 out of 10 times, right? So what am I going to do to put some intelligence in this connection? I'm just going to go back over to Cloud Access Manager. We're going to log in as an administrator. My UI here is a little bit compressed here because of the resolution, but I think I can still pull this off here. So we're going to go over to externalized access control. And instead of saying, I want to bludgeon my users with multi-factor decisions, I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say, I want to use a risk engine. Now, anybody that's familiar with a risk engine is going to get an idea of what they're looking at here, right? There's the idea of generating a score. Depending on what that score is, I'm going to do something with this application access or the global access to the platform, et cetera. And again, I could care less whether you're logging into my environment using ping. Doesn't matter to me. So we're going to click Save. I'm going to go right back over to North Korea, where I have a gun to my head and they're saying log in. And I'm going to say no problem, I will do that for you. And right away, we're going to see, God willing, with the demo gods, it's going to say, hey, wait a second. There's something about you logging in that I don't like. And so we're seeing a multi-factor prompt here. Of course, with our risk engine, as you would imagine, you flip it on, it instantaneously starts doing what it's supposed to do. However, this seems ridiculous to me, that someone from North Korea is going to be, hey, could you just give me your token, please? No. That doesn't make any sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to Cloud Access Manager and log into my security analytics engine. This is my risk engine. I'm going to choose the application that's currently being evaluated. And I've got a couple different policies here. Let me just go into a little bit of detail about what we're seeing here. Within Cloud Access Manager, you could develop a finance policy, you could develop an HR policy, you could develop something that's applied to the engineering system, et cetera. And each one of these things could have different elements that contribute to how I make a risk decision. And I've done that here. I have something that I've assigned specifically to the finance application, and I have something that I've designed that applies to just logging into my environment at all. So if I receive a federated token from ping or something like that, this is, can you even authenticate into my environment, right? That's what this guy is down here. I won't go into the detail of how I hooked it up into CAM. It's pretty straightforward. So here we see something that's actually pretty easy to do. It's just a number of sliders. And so in this particular policy, I've implemented all sorts of different plugins. I just simply said whether I wanted them or not. I adjusted the slider where I wanted to put it. I've had a lot of people ask me, oh my God, do I have to set this up? No, we ship with what we call best practices, but again, come in here and make your decision. If you're kind of confused about what to do here, click this eyeball, and you can kind of evaluate in preview mode. So what if I have an abnormal browser, right? That generates a 20. But what if it's an abnormal time of day, or I'm coming from a blacklist? Okay, now I'm really high, it's an 84. There's something else I want to show you guys here before we move on, and that's the notion here of risk being something that typically in most environments is a negative indicator. There's something bad about you. There's something about you that's making you a high risk. We also have something called positive indicators, right? They're like counteracting forces. And so I could say, yes, you have an abnormal browser, but you're coming from a whitelisted server, or you've already used strong authentication, et cetera, right? So you can get fairly detailed in our environment. But again, you don't necessarily have to be an engineer to figure this stuff out. It's pretty straightforward. The little guy that killed us a second ago is this guy here. Let's go find him. I just created a simple policy specifically for North Korea, and right now it generates a 40, which for me would have been a multi-factor prompt. We're just going to pump that guy up and say accept, right? He is now a serious risk. We're going to go back to North Korea and try this again. And again, why is it evaluating me before it calculates risk? It's because we take who the user is in account when we calculate risk, right? We don't just say, oh, you're North Korea, you can't come in. You might be able to, depending on who you are, if you're our North Korean employee. All right, so now I have a big problem. As a user who has hit the environment, let's say with an adware signature or a really threatening spyware, plus the fact I went from my home to Starbucks, and the guy who designed the policy said, whatever you're doing is a high enough risk that I don't want to really let you through, this is going to generate a help desk call. So if we go back over here and take a look at what happens in a help desk scenario, basically your help desk analyst is going to come in here and say, all right, well, let me try to see what's going on. And again, kind of a low resolution, but here's Joe. He just tried to come in. He's unauthorized with a high risk. It's showing a valid North Korean IP address. Let's scroll over here and open this guy up, and we'll show the policy evaluation. So one of the things I'm going to do for you when your users call up is they're going to say, I don't know why I'm not connecting. You're going to tell them specifically why. You're going to say, okay, well, I see you're coming in from a restricted country, and that generated an 83, plus you used weak authentication. That to me is just kind of a default risk. One of the things I like is that if you had the Sonicwall risk indicator showing up here for malware detection, it would actually tell you the signature of the spyware, the Trojan horse, et cetera. It would literally tell you the signature. So two things can happen here. One is I can say, okay, I can see this is you and not Kim Jong that's trying to connect. And the other thing is, I'll go ahead and let you through. You prove that this is you. This is not necessarily the biggest risk ever. So I'm going to say, let's create an override. Well, let's make it for like a half an hour. Whatever, we'll make it for 53 minutes. Click save. And if I go back, of course, if I try this again, we shouldn't get prompted for anything. Now, this override that I did isn't like some forget the policy, let everybody through. It's specifically for this user on this machine in this browser. If I went to a different browser, I would not be able to get in, right? If I went to my mobile phone and I'm in North Korea, I would not be able to get in. Okay, so there's a very specific thumbprint that we're looking for here, and I basically just said, okay, you prove that you're in North Korea, they've got a gun to your head, your life is, well, you know, hopefully in your company, your life is more important than divulging something out of the HR system. Questions about risk? We got one more thing we're going to take a look at. Any questions about risk engines, making that available to apps, turnkey? Pretty straightforward stuff, yeah? What do you mean?
Have an exception.
Yeah. Oh.
Monitoring should be.
Yeah. I think I know what you mean. So there's two levels of monitoring built into the risk engine. One of them is something that I'll tell you, right, as the user. I'm going to say, Vlad, I'm going to say, someone just logged in with your credential. It may be you, I don't know, but they logged in from Beijing. And you can go, oh my God, I need to change my credentials, right? The other thing is that depending on what the risk is or whatever, we could send it to an administrator as well. Yeah, so we're going to be proactive about it. And then you can be very, very specific. On this indicator, I want the admin people notified. On this indicator, I want the user notified. I don't want anybody notified. Yeah, that's kind of what you meant, I think. Yeah. Question?
So I'm just curious about that communication channel there. So let's say that somebody logged in North Korea, it sent you a notice that says, hey, somebody just used your credentials. And then that person then called the help desk and social engineered an override. Do you have the ability, and it would be really cool if you did, I don't expect you to, do you have the ability as an end user to say, it's
Yeah, so I see. So in other words, circumvent the call to the help desk, which I imagine is going to come, the social engineering call, and basically notify the help desk people that, hey, I got notified of this. This isn't me. Under no circumstances should you allow this person through. Yeah, no, not now. However, you can actually wordsmith the messaging that comes out of this as much as you want. Throw a hyperlink in there. Do whatever you want. So there's that opportunity. It's not built into the platform just yet, but yeah. Now, in our suite, though, we do have ways to identify users. We can do text messaging and challenge response questions and whatnot. It wouldn't necessarily be built into this scenario, but it's possible.
No,
Yeah.
I got you.
Yeah.
It would be a really cool feature if you could
Yeah.
have the user just, override the override button.
Yeah. This product manager's right there, so that would be a really cool feature, Dave. So, yeah. Yeah. No, it's, did you have a comment too or question? No? Okay. Anybody else? Yeah.
Can we trigger another MFA environment?
We can. Yeah. Anything, right now our MFA is limited to an extent without customization to radius servers or certificate-based approach, right? So smart cards, X509 certificates, et cetera. We actually can use that as a primary form of authentication or a step-up or multi-factor. We can do both. We have some customers that deploy certificates to their mobile phones because they don't want their users to have to authenticate to a login screen on their mobile phone. So it'll challenge them for a certificate. They automatically log into the environment. Is there another question? I'm sorry, what was that?
Do you maintain the server-side sections as well, the user sections of the server side?
In a way, yeah. Think about anything like this as being a high availability fault tolerant system. All right, let's just say that as a preface. So you may have a data center in New Orleans, you may have another one in Baton Rouge, and another one in Dallas somewhere, okay? Our server information is stored in the database to an extent. However, the session that keeps the token, let's just say, the session ID that keeps you alive is actually on that server that's in your DMZ. It's on this, what we call a proxy server. It's a very underloaded term. Okay, I say proxy, it makes it sound like one thing. It's a very underloaded term. There's way more power there than what we're talking about. The only reason why I'm bringing this up is that if that particular set of servers was to come down for maintenance and you would automatically go to the center in Dallas, the only thing that would be required is that you logged in again. It would actually force you to log in again. And I think that's probably the best answer I could give you there. I don't know if that's what you were looking for, but yeah. Yeah.
If you are maintaining the sections on the server side, even when you get a notification that there is fraud, you can actually deny by terminating the section on the server side.
I'm not entirely sure we would even be open to that risk, to tell you the truth. It's kind of going to your point. I'm not even sure the way we're architected that we would be even open to that risk. You can't get a session in here unless you've successfully authenticated and gotten through the risk engine. And the session isn't portable, right? So if I had another session or another set of servers in another geographical region, between those different regions, my risk would be calculated the same, but the session isn't necessarily going to travel with you. You'd have to generate a brand new one if you left this one that you established with a session to begin with. And again, you can't do it unless it's actually completely valid. I think that's the right answer.
All he's doing is thinking about some really fancy ways of addressing the same basic auto override to the override.
Yeah.
But the nuance is that actually we haven't gotten a session yet. There's
Yeah.
a game that's going to get played here in the next couple of minutes in a phone call. That's going to result in the session.
Yeah.
That's the one that we want to avoid. But that's going to probably require a user interaction, interactive user event to kind of like give us a signal that says, what happened wasn't you.
I think you would ask for just a kill switch to end your session with the
Yeah,
identity provider.
you wouldn't even have one. You can't even get one unless you can get through completely.
Establish a session with the cloud identity access manager.
Mhm.
And you have a session there.
Yep.
Kill that session on a one-off. Hey, found out this guy doing some, it's him, he's doing bad things, I'm gonna kill his session.
So,
There is an interesting scenario where you end up with a risk calculation after you've established session that happens downstream of the authentication. There is so for the video and recording, there is an opportunity to maybe continue in a continuous auth kind of the spirit, the idea that we're going to do some downstream event and it's going to give us a different signal. We're going to be more uncomfortable than we were 30 minutes ago when we were actually willing to establish your session.
That's true.
So now we want to come back around and we want to get very aggressive with you. We want to force a reauthentication or something like that. That's a great idea. And that's actually that's a really nice idea, nice way of syncing these two.
You know, it's interesting. We don't even really market, as far as I know, Cloud Access Manager doing continuous auth, but it does. It does it for every single thing that you do in the environment. So if you establish a session, and then 5 minutes later you go connect to Salesforce, there may be some aspect specific to the Salesforce implementation that says, well, this is way too sensitive. I don't care if you got access to the HR system, but you're not getting into Salesforce. And so it's every single time the IDP is pinged, for lack of a better word, it's going to evaluate your risk. Drive one point home before we transition out of this one and go to the last demo, something I want to point out. Just remember, if you have an SSO project in place and you're not doing continuous authentication or adaptive authentication, you're not doing risk, you're not implementing multi-factor, again, don't get rid of your existing investment in ping, but bring something like this WAM solution on, augment what you've got today, and all this stuff is just turnkey. It's just instantaneous. It just starts working. Very, very easy to do. There's another presentation I do on the low-hanging fruit of identity and access management. There's a couple different products that people, if they're not doing it today, they need to do it right away, and that's privileged access management, multi-factor, and WAM. And so, again, it's very easy to implement. No heavy lifting required. So I went to the wrong slide here. Let's go through a couple of these real quick. Again, I'm not good at computers. Okay, this is the last thing I kind of want to talk about. We've got eight and a half minutes. It's no problem. Again, I may be mentioning this topic to you guys, and you kind of go like, no way, Joe, you're full of it. No, I'm serious. There are so many customers that we have out there that are still getting intranet access to their partners or even their own employees, which is a little bit more acceptable, a little bit. But they do it with VPN. I hate to beat these guys to death, but everybody knows that the initial attack vector for Target was a phishing attack on a HVAC contractor who had VPN access. And so I go into these environments, and the first thing I say is, we sell VPN technology, all right? It's built into our Sonicwall platform. It's something that we do a lot of, but we have to reserve it specifically for business cases that are, where it's just essential and there's nothing else that can be done. The notion of giving intranet access to internet users without the VPN is actually one of the features that's built into a reverse proxy, okay? And so if you go with reverse proxy technology, and again, in this particular scenario, we're going to put the Cloud Access Manager, an extremely lightweight reverse proxy sitting in the DMZ, and your employees don't need VPN access to get access to intranet applications. Your partners don't need it. Basically, you hit the URL that you're looking for. Maybe it authenticates with ping. Maybe it authenticates with Cloud Access Manager. I don't really care. I'm going to look at the risk involved, the connection you're making. I'm going to determine based upon security policy whether or not you're allowed to get the application behind the firewall. And again, whether you're on your mobile phone, the library computer, your wife's computer, your kid's computer, that application shows up, okay? This is built into our environment. Now, there's another nuance, though, when it talks about giving intranet access to a partner or even your own employees, but mostly partners. And that's the nuance of people provisioning partner accounts inside their internal directories. And I see it, again, all the time. And sometimes it's a necessary evil. Okay, I do understand that. But we need to talk to our customers. We need to talk to our own company and say, if we're keeping an account for a partner internally in our own directories, we have to stop doing that. And the reason why, again, may be obvious to some, not obvious to everybody, is let's say that George shows up at Dell, which is highly likely after this week, and goes on a wild security rampage, right? He's deleting files and stealing documents and everything like that. What's Dell going to do? The first thing we're going to do is deactivate his access. And because we use our identity controls, he's going to get his access denied everywhere, except at Coca-Cola, right? Where he did a POC project or a proof of concept or something, and they provisioned an account internally with the VPN so he could get access to the lab, right? Why hasn't Coca-Cola deactivated George's account? Dell fired him because Coca-Cola has no freaking idea that George just got fired, all right? This is a huge issue. If you're giving partners access through VPN technology, please stop. And if you're provisioning partners internally, that's another thing you might want to take a look at stopping. And again, it's not always available, but sometimes you can do it. So the notion here, again, which might be a first-class citizen in everyone's mind, the notion here is saying, let's stop provisioning internally and instead do partner federation. So it's a really easy, obvious concept. Someone hits your environment, and rather than you saying, yeah, let me authenticate you internally, and again, I'm afraid that there's a lot of people in here that are kind of like, yeah, this is an old concept. Trust me, not everybody thinks it's an old concept with what I see. So let's do a little different thing here. The whole time I've been logging into this little portal here, I've been doing it directly against my Active Directory. I'm going to switch that to my partner's federated site. Okay, so now when I hit my website under my control, the partner hits it, and immediately they get redirected to their own federated IDP. Okay, so now the onus of authenticating this user is put onto Aviato. Okay, not me. And so I'm going to go ahead and log in over here. I say sign in. Aviato generates a SAML token, sends that back to my company, and my company says, here are the applications you're allowed to have access to. Okay, now, is he on my VPN network to get to the form fill app and the Windows app, even federated apps, et cetera? No, he's not on my network. He doesn't need to be on my network. My reverse proxy will give him access to what he needs to get access to. The only thing I want to point out here, though, when it comes to just kind of like carrying on the use case, making sure we're clear about the things we can do, most people here should be fairly familiar with a SAML token. This is the token that was just generated. And the only thing I really want to point out, on the very, very bottom here, where it says membership on the far right-hand side, that essentially is a SAML claim type, okay? I didn't use a URN, I just said it's called membership, and his membership is gold. What our partners should be delivering to us in a SAML token are things like job codes that we can work on, titles, entitlements, et cetera. And so what we do in CAM, because this guy needs access to his app, what we do in CAM is we go over here and we say, all right, I know I'm going to be getting access from Aviato, so let's go to roles. And again, forgive the squished UI here, it's because of the resolution I'm stuck on. And these are my special partners. Right now, I don't have anything that has to do with Aviato. I did say that in Active Directory, the engineering group has access to this particular role. I'm going to come over here and just say, hey, anybody that logs on from this partner, and again, I'm not using a URI or URN, I'm going to get rid of that. I'm going to say if membership has the value gold, and again, there's a lot of overloaded capabilities here. Let's just click save there. Let me go double check that, because I may have done that wrong. Let's go see. Let's go log in one more time. I'm going to kill this and get a fresh session. And let's make sure that this is working now. And again, I just realized a mistake that I may have made, but I'll fix it very quickly. All right, we're going to come in with Joe again, generate a SAML token, come over to the environment, and there's the Aviato partner app, okay? And so you don't have this person internally to look at his attributes in Active Directory, and et cetera. And so the ability to do like attribute-based access controls and whatever, it doesn't mean that you can't do it. You can still do it. So accept the federated token, tell the vendor that's connecting to your environment that please include these attributes because it's your responsibility to vouch for this person. It's not my responsibility. But then once you receive that token, you can use that token to vouch for access internally in the applications that you have. And again, if in lieu of this, you're doing local accounts inside Active Directory or an LDAP database, or you're providing VPN access, basically do whatever you can to stop. They're huge attack vectors. With the vendors that say we don't have an IDP capability, again, do whatever you can to strongly, strongly encourage them to do so. Sorry if I went a little bit long. There's 1 minute and 30 seconds left. After me is George. He's going to talk about governing identities in the cloud. But any questions before we kind of wrap up here?
I'm just curious, when you guys do SAML, do you guys still do the threat scoring?
We do. There's some things that we can't do, right? For instance, I can't look in an internal directory and say, is this person part of the admin group or whatever? Although I don't know if we can do it based upon SAML attributes today. I got to go back to the dev team and find out. I don't see why we won't be able to if we don't now. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, it still gets executed. So there's a number of forensics that we're doing on that individual user identity, and we're still doing behavioral analytics on that person, at least. Yeah, at least. Good question.
Does this reverse proxy approach apply to OS level?
OS level. No, I think the answer to that question is only web apps. Only web apps, yeah. So it doesn't matter what type of web app it is, essentially, as long as it's the HTTP protocol or HTTPS protocol, then you're good to go, yeah. But it's not gonna help you with like doing secure access to a file server or something like that. That's not gonna happen, right?
Unless it's from SharePoint, in which case.
Yeah, you could. There are solutions.
Could you use VDS as your backend account repository?
Virtual directory server?
Virtual directory, yeah.
You can use virtual directories to do a lot of things. That's one solution that a lot of people do that they go with because they tell their partners, okay, you don't support federation, but can I use my virtual directory server to at least talk to you? And they're comfortable with that. For the folks that aren't familiar with it, they're comfortable with it because they're only going to expose first name, last name, and password. You're right, yeah, you totally can. Although it's a brittle approach and it's open to more attack vectors in my opinion. But yeah, you could, yeah. 19 seconds. Oh no, it's going the opposite direction. I'm over by 20. Sorry. All right, thank you. Appreciate it. Stay tuned for George. Thank you.